You're listening to the Student Loan Show. This is episode 45. On today's show, we explore the value of a fun goal in paying your student loan debt and also the question of what's more important, stuff or experience. We're going to have a student loan success story right here today on the Student Loan Show. Stay with us. Hello again and welcome back to the Student Loan Show. This is Jay Fleischman. Thank you so much for taking the time to download the show. It's going to be a really good one. Today we've got a student loan success story with a woman by the name of Zina Kumok. And Zina took 3 years to pay off $28,000 in student loan debt, which in and of itself is an amazing goal, especially given the fact that she was a journalism major. She was working for a newspaper making peanuts, and then she up and left that job and she went to work for a not-for-profit. Also, not exactly a high-paying job. But what makes it more amazing is the stuff that she was able to do while she was paying off that $28,000 in student loan debt. And during our half-hour conversation, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about life goals. We talked about upbringing, we talked about prioritizing, we talked about budgeting, and the one thing that I took away from the conversation is the value of having a fun goal in paying your student loan debt. She incorporated what she wanted to do into her entire repayment plan, and what she wanted to make sure that she could get done is live a life that she enjoyed while she was still focusing on paying down the student loan debt. And she made a lot of sacrifices, but the sacrifices that she made were sacrifices that were easy to give up because she knew that she was doing the things that she wanted to do. Please listen in on this conversation. It's really fascinating. Here is my conversation with Zina Kumok. Welcome back to another episode of the Student Loan Show. Today we are showcasing a fairly recent graduate in the grand scheme of things who took a really big step and paid off all of her student loans in an insanely short amount of time. And I say insanely short amount of time because I held on to my student loans for 20 years. I did it on purpose, but I held on to it for 20 years. So another story for another day. So with us today is Zina Kumok. Zina, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jay. I'm excited to be here.
So start from the very beginning. Or at the very end. How long did it take you to pay off the student loans from the time you graduated until you made the last payment?
So I had a 6-month grace period that I used up until the date expired. And so I graduated in May 2011, and my grace period ended in November 2011. That's when I made my first payment. Mm-hmm. And 3 years later, I was debt-free.
3 years to pay off a student loan in a world where everybody says there's no way I'm ever paying off these student loans. You're going to bury me with them. And you took 3 years. How much?
$28,000.
$28,000.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go through the normal things. Lottery winner? No.
No.
Stranger on the street hands you a money order for 28 grand?
I wish. I haven't. All the strangers I know just take my money.
There you go. So you did this, but you did this all on your own.
Yeah, I didn't have, I think a lot of people assume, parents helped me or my husband helped me, and I love them all dearly, but it was very much like on my own.
Okay. So when did you know was this always your plan? You were going to wait until the 6 months ended and you were going to pedal to the metal and just knock it all out? Or did that come along at some point later on?
No, it was very slow at first because I graduated and I had like almost nothing in savings, and I had to borrow my money from my parents to pay for my security deposit on my first apartment, which is really, really embarrassing. So at first, the minimum payment on my loans made up 20% of my take-home pay. So coupled with I was living alone and I was driving to see my boyfriend 6 hours every weekend. I really didn't have a whole lot of extra money to put toward my loans.
Hmm.
So I just decided that, I think I put about $10 extra a month. And I just decided that anytime I did have extra money, if I did a freelance gig or if it was my birthday or if I visited my grandma and she gave me some money, I would just make a commitment to put that money toward my loans.
So basically, everything was going to the loans, is what it sounds like. I mean, 20% of take home.
Yeah.
If you're driving 6 hours every weekend, unless you're in a Tesla, then there's gas and there's, wear and tear on the vehicle. So there must have
Yeah.
been some of that was involved. You were driving though, right? You weren't like taking a Bolt bus or something like that.
Yeah, no, I probably could have bussed, but it was definitely a situation where I was living in a really small town, so there weren't a lot of options.
Hmm.
And my car was a 99 Toyota Avalon, which is great for a lot of things, but gas mileage is not one of them.
Right.
And prices were around $4 when I was doing this. So, yeah, it was
It was
not
tight.
great.
It was tight. It was tight. So,
Yeah.
so were these all feds? Were they a combination of federal and
hmm
private? All private? What was the breakdown?
No, it was all federal, which was good in some sense. My interest rate was still 6.8%, which is a real killer. And I think my mom, her student loans, her federal loans were like 3.4 or something. So I never understood that, like why it had to be so different.
But still 6.8 is still a lot less than say a credit card interest rate. So I mean,
Yeah, and that's one thing. I never had credit card debt or car loan or anything like that.
was that by design?
My parents had credit card debt when I was growing up, and they were really open about how they got into it, how long it was taking them to pay off. If they did balance transfer, they would talk about that. So that was something that seeing how that affected them and how that, you know, limited the choices they made while they were trying to pay that off, that made me really determined not to get into any kind of debt. Obviously, except for college, like I just knew that was something that if I wanted to go anywhere decent, that was something I was going to have to do.
And how do you think that, and obviously the fact that your parents were in debt and were so open about it
hmm
impacted your decisions about debt. Um, and do you think that that also impacted that decision of, well, I've got no money anyway it's November, December of 2011. I just got out of school. I've got no money anyway. You know, I'm just going to do it. Was that, do you think that that had the impact there as well?
I, it definitely made me more aware of money. And even though I've had periods in my life where I was spending a lot, I never spent, I never went on a credit card that I couldn't pay off. So it definitely made me really cautious. Because I had people who were like, oh, it's just going on my credit card. Or like, oh, I don't know how much my balance is. And I was very much aware of like, I don't want to have student loans. I want to pay them off as quickly as I can. Because I knew that once you get into debt, especially paying interest, you make a lot of sacrifices, things that you can't get when you have loans, like a nice vacation or, going out more, doing more fun things. So I was definitely aware of the trade-off that you have to make if you do get into debt.
Absolutely. And when you came out of school and you get the 6 month window, and you mentioned that your payments were 20% of your take home pay, what kind of
hmm
work, what were you employed? I know you're self employed now.
Yeah.
Were you employed in, as my friends called it when I started my own business, were you working in a real job? Or because that's what they called
I
it
think
when,
so.
okay, because when I started my own business and because I was working a bunch of other jobs when I first started, and they said, well, you could always get a real job. I'm like, well, wait, this is a real job. What's wrong with you people? Anyway, so were you working for somebody else at that point?
Yeah, I was a journalism major, so I graduated and I was a newspaper reporter, which we all know have the great reputation of paying so well.
Uh, yeah, well, so if you started the job and you knew that it didn't pay that well, and I'm sure you knew well in advance of that, when did you declare the major?
I decided to be a journalist when I was 16, I
Ah,
think. And this is gonna sound really stupid now, but when you're a kid and people tell you like, oh, that's not gonna pay well, especially for journalists, I secretly think that every journalist kind of has a martyr mentality because it's this really romantic, idealized profession, and you're just going to be striving to get the truth, and you're going to be exposing corruption, and you're not going to be paid anything. Um, and in college, that did seem very romantic. When I graduated, I realized like, oh, this really sucks. Like, I really wish I was making more money right now.
I'm covering school board meetings and not
Yeah,
making
I
enough
did
money.
cover school board meetings.
I think everybody does when they start out. I've got a bunch of friends of mine who are journalists in fairly large papers, and they all start out that way. But I think you're right. I think that writing of any sort is such a romanticized profession. And I
Hmm.
think journalism in particular. You've got the image of the investigative reporter digging deep and uncovering corruption in City Hall, or whatever it is that your bent is. So I think that's probably right. I don't think that that sounds stupid at all. I think that that's just part of growing up and learning what a career path is. I mean,
Yeah, I that's something that, when you're a kid, the concept of, a salary doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I knew how much my parents made, so when people would say, "Oh, well, you'll be lucky if you make 30 grand," I didn't really know what that meant. And that's one thing that I'm try to educate people about is like 30 grand might not sound like nothing. But when you've got rent by yourself, when you don't have roommates, um, gas, bills, student loans, trying to save for retirement, trying to, save for an emergency fund, that amount, gets smaller really quickly.
oh, sure. So you started this job and it's eating up all of your salary. How long was it until you transitioned out of that job and then into another one, or onto your own?
So after that job, I was there about a year, and then I switched over and I worked for a nonprofit because I really just don't like making money. Allergic to it.
Money's
Um,
bad.
yeah, well, I will say this, journalists get paid squat and they get like no benefits, and nonprofit people will get paid squat, but they get tons of really nice benefits. So I did upgrade slightly in that regard.
So there's that, which is good. And
Yeah.
when you went into the nonprofit world, did
Hmm.
was any of it tied to the whole idea of public service loan forgiveness, or maybe I'll be able to?
No.
Okay, so this was true altruism. This was, I'm going to do good.
Honestly, I knew I really wanted a break for journalism. I felt so burnt out. I was working at night cops at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which meant, you work 2 to 10 p.m., like a shift,
Mm-hmm.
and it's murder and fires and car accidents, and listening to the police scanner. Um, so it's not exactly what you go into journalism for, and um, I'm not one of those like amazing writers that everyone like, really sees something in. So I really just wanted to make a change. Plus, my boyfriend and I were still doing long distance, and this job was actually in the city where he was living.
Oh, got it. So you relocated to where he was as part of this whole
Yes.
job move. Okay.
Yes.
And and is are the two of you married now? I think, right?
Yes, we
Oh,
are.
okay. So I had to ask that because there's always, and I've had this conversation a bunch of times today. Whenever somebody uproots their life and moves, there's always a boy or a girl on the other side. There's that's the primary reason that, at least as long as I've been talking to people, why people are going to uproot their lives and move. And it's always interesting to know, well, was that worth it? Did it pan out okay? So I like hearing the yeah, I moved and we're good, because
It's a
if it
very unhappy marriage. That.
well, because if it ends poorly once you move, then it's just compounded bad. But so I'm happy it was
It still would have been worth it because I was living in a really tiny town and I moved to Indianapolis, which was much bigger. So
okay.
either way, it would have worked out, but thankfully it worked out in the most positive way.
Fantastic. So you moved to Indianapolis, and did the two of you move in together right away, or do you have your own separate place, or?
Yeah, he had like just signed a lease right before I got that job.
Mhm.
So I still lived alone for a year, which I was able to put more money toward my loans, but once we did move in together, it made it a lot easier to put even extra money toward my loans since I wasn't, I was able to split the rent and the utilities with someone else.
Got it. And when you're at the nonprofit and you've got no student loan debt, are you still in the 99 Avalon?
So let's see. No, I kept that car. I still have it just because for me, car gets you from point A to point B, and it's not a good enough reason to get into more debt.
Got it. Totally agree, by the way. So you're there, you're working at the nonprofit, you're hammering out the student loan debt. Are you making enough money that you don't need to cut back, or are you still in a position where, I'm making my payments, I can't really afford to make that much more, so I've got to trim stuff off the top as far as my expenses are concerned, or have things evened out at this point?
I was so determined to pay off my loans that I still kept a pretty tight fist on my budget. Um, and it definitely made it a lot easier just, not having to pay gas and as much.
Right.
But I definitely kept a tight rein on eating out, shopping, just any kind of discretionary spending.
Okay, so what keeps your eyes on that brass ring? This is a long time you were focusing on
Hmm.
this. There had to have been times when, you looked in the mirror and you said, "What the heck am I doing? I'm just going out and, you know, I'm gonna have some fun for a little while." What
Yeah.
keeps you focused on that stuff?
I think what helps is being able to spend money on the things that you really care about. So even while I was paying off my loans, I still traveled. So that was something that was a huge priority for me. And it was really nice being able to say, okay, maybe I don't go out, but maybe I can still travel and I can still make that a priority and I can still pay off my loans because that's the number one thing I'm going after. And so I think you always have to be able to, tell yourself like I'm not going out to the bars because I want to save up for a trip to Spain and I'm also trying to pay off my loans. So it is important having like a fun goal because I think we need something positive to save money for, to have a reason to save money or make sacrifices.
Right, right. It can't all be sacrificed, because then at some point
Hmm.
you just boomerang and
Yeah.
it's all over from there. So, but you did some traveling. A,
Hmm.
a lot, a little. Where'd you go? What'd you do? What'd you see?
It's funny. I don't really think of myself as like, oh, like she's the girl that travels, but then I talk to other people and I realize that most of us don't do that. So yeah, right after. But that's something else that my parents always did. Like they always traveled because they didn't want to wait until they were 60 and had hip replacements to travel.
Right.
Um, so after graduation, my boyfriend and I we took 10 days and went to Europe and did the whole hostel thing, which you could not pay me to repeat ever again in my life. Um, and then let's see, 2 years after that, I went to Israel on a birthright trip. A year after that, we went to Spain. Is that it? And then we just had our honeymoon 6 months ago.
Wow. Where'd you go for the honeymoon?
We went to London and Croatia.
Neat.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you talk about people who think that travel is strange or is not something that they've ever done. I didn't get my passport until I was 30, and that was only because I was getting married. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and my now wife turned around to me and she said, "Wait, what do you mean you don't have a passport? We booked this trip. How do you not have a passport?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't really think about that." So that's when I got a passport.
That is so funny.
Yeah. So so what I'm hearing is, I mean, look, your parents, you basically laid it out on the table, and I don't know to the extent that you've done any of this introspective sort of stuff, but I wouldn't you think that it was easier to cut back because you were born and raised with an understanding that stuff is far less important than experience? And your parents trained you to enjoy experience of travel,
hmm
and so you took that along with you. Do you think that made it easier? I mean, you didn't walk by Best Buy and see a brand new MacBook Retina and say, "Ooh, I gotta have that." I mean, maybe you did, but
Well, my father is a software engineer, so Macs are not allowed in our family. Um,
okay,
no, it's funny because you would think that, but I think every kid kind of has that. I don't want to say rebellion because it wasn't a rebellion, but I definitely went through a phase where I was just spending a lot on in college on clothes, on eating out, going out, just you go to Target and spend $50 and you don't even know why. Um, and even though my parents aren't like that, I think there was something about growing up and not being able to get everything I wanted, or I went to really affluent school. And when you grow up around people who have a lot of wealth, and even though my parents are totally middle class, um, it was always like, oh, well, why am I not getting a new car and I have to drive a used car, things like that.
sure.
So I definitely think it was like, okay, I have my own money. I'm gonna buy whatever I want and not really think about it. Um, so going through the process of trying to cut down my budget, it really made me see that you know what, for most of us, stuff isn't really important. I mean, not that it doesn't matter, but we can get by on much less. Like, I don't need to buy a book that I want to read. I can go to the library, and if I love it so much I want to reread it, then I can buy it used. And I don't need to buy new clothes as much as I want them. I can go to a thrift store or Goodwill or consignment and find something there. So that experience was what really taught me, like, oh, like everything that my parents tried to teach me growing up, like I'm now figuring out for myself.
Right. After that rebellion of my parents don't know anything, I know everything, then suddenly you realize, hey, maybe they knew a little bit more than I gave them credit for.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. So at this stage, you're done paying the student loans. And when was it, by the way, that you left the not-for-profit world and decided to freelance or work for yourself?
That was a month ago.
It was a month ago? That was it?
August 28th was my last day of work.
Wow, congratulations.
And then 3 days after that, my husband and I moved to Denver, Colorado.
My God. When you make a break, you make a break.
Yeah, it was definitely planned that we would move.
Mm-hmm.
And then it started out like, okay, well, we'll move and I'll get another job, nonprofit. And then the freelance kind of took off, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll get a part-time job and work on the writing on the side. And then it just kind of snowballed, and I was like, you know what? Let me just give this a try. And then it kind of avalanched into my husband now works with me, so we're both totally self-employed.
Wow. And how does that
Yeah,
feel?
it is awesome. I only recommend working with your spouse if you actually have a good relationship, because if you don't, I'm sure it'd be like the fastest road to divorce. But we get along like gangbusters.
Well, that's good. It certainly helps.
Yeah,
So you're both self-employed. So you've
yeah.
both got that variable income stream going.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that do? And I know that this is slightly off topic from the original one, but how does that alter the way that the two of you put together your monthly budget?
So I budget, I stole this from YNAB, but I budget based off last month's income.
Okay.
So everything I'm earning this month will be for November.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So that this
Yeah.
way, but since the business is so new, and I take it that your husband started when you started, or was he self-employed before you were?
He had like a 2 week head start on me.
Okay.
Um,
So he's an
well,
old pro. I mean, he's I'm kidding.
it, that was a weird 2 weeks though, where he would be like, "What do you want me to do today?" And I'd be like, "Do this, this, and this. I'm gonna go to work. I'll see you later."
Bye. Have fun. Uh so you're both fairly new at this. And
hmm
so, the whole peaks and valleys thing, um, is there a way that you've figured out, and I know that it's still fairly new, is there a way that you've figured out to plan ahead for that worst case scenario, that down market month, or the
hmm
client that pays a little bit more slowly? What have you been working on?
So that was one thing that we decided we were going to move to Denver probably about a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And um, so after I became debt free, I just decided we merged our finances and we just started saving up for an emergency fund. So we have 6 months worth of expenses, cash in the bank, and that really helps out with cash flow. I still have clients where I'm waiting on payments from July. So it would be really, really stressful if we didn't have that cushion.
Right. So you made the move having planned for a fairly long period of time. I mean, this wasn't
Yes.
that's it. I quit. I'm going to start my own thing, and we're going to up and move, which is good. So there was a plan in place, and you've got a budget in place that is at least at some level reliant upon your current universe rather than your planned universe. So
hmm
so I've got three more questions, only one of which has to do with the budgeting part. What do you think about incurring debt for the purposes of growing a business?
Um, so that was something I never got into debt to start this business, but um, last year I went to FinCon for the first time, and everyone was like, "Oh, if you want to get your blog going, you got to do this, and you got to get on WordPress, you got to buy a domain." And it was really stressful spending money on stuff when my blog wasn't making anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that, everyone says you have to spend money to make money, but that's a really hard concept when it's like, okay, I'm just spending my paycheck on this thing, and who knows if it's going to work out. But that's something that I think you kind of just have to take a gamble on. And luckily, my startup costs at first were really minimal. Hosting is pretty inexpensive. A domain name is like $15, so it's really not that big of a deal. And then since I had already come from a writing background, starting to get more writing gigs was pretty easy because I already had a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely recommend that there's some really great paid job boards out there that are actually good and will actually get you paid gigs. Um, so that's something where you might have to make an investment first that will pay off pretty quickly. So there are definitely some startup costs, but it's pretty minimal. And right now I think I average about 600 a month in expenses for my business.
Okay. Okay, that's certainly marginal. I or
Yeah.
or we're not talking about $50,000 a month. Marginal, of course, is all relative, but it's lower than one might otherwise expect, is my point. So, last couple of questions. Your education and your debt and the years of cutting back and not doing things that you might otherwise have done, looking back, worth it? Not worth it?
No, I don't know that I would feel comfortable about being self-employed, moving to a new city, having two people essentially self-employed, if I wasn't debt-free, if my husband wasn't debt-free. So, I mean, it really takes a lot of the worry out of it. And because we don't have loans, our living expenses are pretty low. So that's why we were able to get that 6-month emergency fund kind of quickly, because we just have the basic bills. We don't have any loans to pay off.
Yeah.
So honestly, it's made everything so much easier. I mean, it was hard, but now I feel like we have so much more freedom to do things than a lot of other people, which is really, really incredible.
And would you do it all over again? Would you go to the same school, have the same college experience, the same loans? Would you do it all over again?
I would say yes, because that's where I met my husband,
Okay.
and B, I had a really great education. The journalism school I went to was really good, and I had tons of connections and had a lot of great internships because of that. So the only thing I do wish I had been more diligent about in high school, just making sure to apply for more scholarships and things like that. But I definitely don't regret that as a choice as far as my education.
Excellent. Well, that's good news. And I'm sure your husband appreciates that too.
Yeah.
And right now, I know you do freelance writing and you also do some coaching as well, correct?
Yeah, that's something that I kind of put on the back burner, but I am starting up that up again. And then I'm also working on a course about paying off your loans, because when you do something like this, everyone starts asking you how you're able to do it. So that's something that should be up in the next few months.
Excellent. Well, we will look out for it. And your website is debtfreeafter3, THREE.com, correct? And so when you launch the course, it's going to be over there, or are you going to be putting it someplace else that we can point people to?
I would just go there for any updates. You can sign up on my email list and you'll be the first one to hear about it when the course launches.
Sounds good to me. All right. Well, Zina, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Good luck. We will definitely look out for that course, and I wish you all the success.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. I'm so glad to be on.
And there you have it. My interview with Zina Kumok, who took 3 years to pay off $28,000 in student loan debt and did a fairly significant amount of traveling in the process, including uprooting her entire life and moving to a brand new place just because it was what she wanted to do. I think that there's a lot of really good stuff in here, a lot of really good life lessons from somebody who's comparatively young. She's really got her head in the game. She's doing the things that she wants to do, and she's not letting the fact that she graduated with $28,000 worth of student loan debt hold her back. 3 years, 28 grand. If she can do it, then I know you can also. Check her out at debtfreeafter3.com. My name is Jay Fleischman. I am your host this week as well as every week. I am not only your host, I am also a student loan lawyer. You can check out studentloanshow.com for complete archives of all of our shows. Get some great resources. Find our Facebook group. Whole lot of stuff that you can get done there over at studentloanshow.com. There will be links to the things that we talked about here, including all of the places where you can find Zina Kumok over at the show notes for this show at studentloanshow.com /SLS045. I'll be right back here with you next week, and until then, remember, always look both ways before you cross the street.